go from here? Where do we go?
I was here 4 years ago, and I remember at the time that the talks weren't put online. I think they were given to TEDsters in a box set of DVDs, which they put on their shelves where they are now. And actually, Chris called me a week after I'd given my talk and said, "We're going to start putting them online. Could we put yours online?" I said, "Sure." And 4 years later, as he said, it's been seen by it's been downloaded 4 million times. So I suppose you could multiply that by 20 or something to get the number of people who've seen it. And as Chris says, there is a hunger for videos of me. You know. Don't you feel? So this whole event has been an elaborate build-up to me doing another one for you, so here it is. Al Gore spoke at the TED conference I spoke at 4 years ago and talked about the climate crisis, and I referenced that at the end of my last talk. So I want to pick up from there, because I only had 18 minutes, frankly. And so as I was saying, you see, he's right. I mean, there is a major climate crisis, obviously, and I think if people don't believe it, they should get out more. But I believe there's a second climate crisis, which is as severe, which has the same origins, and that we have to deal with the same urgency. And I mean by this, and you may say, by the way, look, I'm good. You know, I have one climate crisis. I don't really need a second one. But this is a crisis of not natural resources, though I believe that's true, but a crisis of human resources. I believe fundamentally, as many speakers have said during the past few days, that we make very poor use of our talents. Very many people go through their whole lives having no real sense of what their talents may be, or if they have any to speak of. I meet all kinds of people who don't think they're really good at anything. Actually, I kind of divide the world into two groups now. Jeremy Bentham, the great utilitarian philosopher, once spiked this argument. You know, he said there are two types of people in this world: those who divide the world into two types, and those who do not. Well, well, I do. And I meet all kinds of people who don't enjoy what they do. They simply go through their lives getting on with it. They get no great pleasure from what they do. They endure it rather than enjoy it and wait for the weekend. But I also meet people who love what they do and couldn't imagine doing anything else. If you said to them, "Don't do this anymore," they'd wonder what you were talking about. Because it isn't what they do, it's who they are. They say, "But this is me. You know, it would be foolish for me to abandon this because it speaks to my most authentic self." And it's not true of enough people. In fact, on the contrary, I think it's still true of a minority of people. And I think there are many possible explanations for it, and high among them is education. Because education, in a way, dislocates very many people from their natural talents. And human resources are like natural resources. They're often buried deep. You have to go looking for them. They're not just lying around on the surface. You have to create the circumstances where they show themselves. And you might imagine education would be the way that happens, but too often it's not. Every education system in the world is being reformed at the moment, and it's not enough. Reform is no use anymore, because that's simply improving a broken model. What we need, and the word's been used many times during the course of the past few days, is not evolution, but a revolution in education. This has to be transformed into something else. One of the real challenges is to innovate fundamentally in education. Innovation is hard because it means doing something that people don't find very easy for the most part. It means challenging what we take for granted, things that we think are obvious. The great problem for reform or transformation is the tyranny of common sense. Things that people think, well, they can't be done any other way because that's the way it's done. I came across a great quote recently from Abraham Lincoln, who I thought you'd be pleased to have quoted at this point. He said this in December 1862 to the second annual meeting of Congress. I ought to explain that I have no idea what was happening at the time. We don't teach American history in Britain. We suppress it. You know, this is our policy, so... So no doubt something fascinating was happening in December 1862, which the Americans among us will be aware of. But he said this: the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. I love that. Not rise to it, rise with it. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. I love that word, disenthrall. You know what he means? That there are ideas that all of us are enthralled to, which we simply take for granted as the natural order of things, the way things are. And many of our ideas have been formed not to meet the circumstances of this century, but to cope with the circumstances of previous centuries. But our minds are still hypnotized by them, and we have to disenthrall ourselves of some of them. Now, doing this is easier said than done. It's very hard to know, by the way, what it is you take for granted. And the reason is that you take it for granted. So let me ask you something you may take for granted. How many of you here are over the age of 25? That's not what I think you take for granted. I'm sure you're familiar with that already. But are there any people here under the age of 25? Great. Now, those over 25, could you put your hands up if you're wearing a wristwatch? Now, that's a great deal of us, isn't it? Ask a room full of teenagers the same thing. Teenagers do not wear wristwatches. I don't mean they can't or they're not allowed to, they just often choose not to. And the reason is, you see, that we were brought up in a pre-digital culture, those of us over 25, and so for us, if you want to know the time, you had to wear something to tell it. Kids now live in a world which is digitized, and the time for them is everywhere. They see no reason to do this. And by the way, you don't need to do it either, it's just that you've always done it, and you carry on doing it. My daughter never wears a watch. My daughter Kate, who's 20, she doesn't see the point. You know, as she says, you know, like, it's a single-function device. You know, like how lame is that? You know, and I say, no, it tells the date as well. You know, it has multiple functions. But you see, there are things we're enthralled to in education. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them is the idea of linearity. That it starts here, and you go through a track, and if you do everything right, you will end up set for the rest of your life. Everybody who's spoken at TED has told us implicitly or sometimes explicitly a different story, that life is not linear, it's organic. We create our lives symbiotically as we explore our talents in relation to the circumstances they help to create for us. But you know, we have become obsessed with this linear narrative, and probably the pinnacle for education is getting you to college. I think we are obsessed with getting people to college. Certain sorts of college. I don't mean you shouldn't go to college, but not everybody needs to go, and not everybody needs to go now. Maybe they go later, not right away. I was up in San Francisco a while ago doing a book signing. There was this guy buying a book. He was in his 30s, and I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a fireman." And I said, "How long have you been a fireman?" He said, "Always. I've always been a fireman." And I said, "Well, when did you decide?" He said, "As a kid." He said, "Actually, it was a problem for me at school, because at school, everybody wanted to be a fireman. He said that I wanted to be a fireman, and he said, when I got to the senior year of school, my teachers didn't take it seriously. This one teacher didn't take it seriously. He said I was throwing my life away if that's all I chose to do with it. That I should go to college, I should become a professional person, I had great potential, and I was wasting my talent to do that. And he said it was humiliating because he said it in front of the whole class, and I really felt dreadful. But it's what I wanted. And as soon as I left school, I applied to the fire service, and I was accepted. And he said, I was thinking about that guy recently, just a few minutes ago when you were speaking about this teacher. He said, because 6 months ago, I saved his life. He said he was in a car wreck, and I pulled him out, gave him CPR, and I saved his wife's life as well. He said, I think he thinks better of me now. You know what I mean? Human communities depend upon a diversity of talent, not a singular conception of ability. And at the heart of our challenges, at the heart of the challenge is to reconstitute our sense of ability and of intelligence. This linearity thing is a problem. When I arrived in LA about 9 years ago, I came across a policy statement, very well intentioned, which said college begins in kindergarten. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. If we had time, I could go into this, but we don't. Kindergarten begins in kindergarten. A friend of mine once said, a 3-year-old is not half a 6-year-old. They're 3. But as we just heard in this last session, there's such competition now to get into kindergarten, to get to the right kindergarten, that people are being interviewed for it at 3. Kids sitting in front of unimpressed panels, with their resumes. Flicking through it, saying, what, this is it? You've been around for 36 months and this is it. You've achieved nothing. Spent the first 6 months breastfeeding, what I can say. It's outrageous as a conception, but it tracks through. The other big issue is conformity. We have built our education systems on the model of fast food. This is something Jamie Oliver talked about the other day. There are 2 models of quality assurance in catering. One is fast food, where everything is standardized. The other are things like Zagat and Michelin restaurants, where everything is not standardized. They're customized to local circumstances. And we have sold ourselves into a fast food model of education. And it's impoverishing our spirits and our energies as much as fast food is depleting our physical bodies. I think we have to recognize a couple of things here. One is that human talent is tremendously diverse. People have very different aptitudes. I worked out recently that I was given a guitar as a kid at about the same time that Eric Clapton got his first guitar. It worked out for Eric, that's all I'm saying. In a way, it did not for me. I could not get this thing to work, no matter how often and how hard I blew into it. It just wouldn't work. But it's not only about that, it's about passion. Often people are good at things they don't really care for. It's about passion and what excites our spirit and our energy. And if you're doing the thing that you love to do, that you're good at, time takes a different course entirely. My wife's just finished writing a novel, and I think it's a great book. But she disappears for hours on end. You know this. If you're doing something you love, an hour feels like 5 minutes. If you're doing something that doesn't resonate with your spirit, 5 minutes feels like an hour. And the reason so many people are opting out of education is because it doesn't feed their spirit. It doesn't feed their energy or their passion. So I think we have to change metaphors. We have to go from what is essentially an industrial model of education, a manufacturing model, which is based on linearity and conformity and batching people. We have to move to a model that is based more on principles of agriculture. We have to recognize that human flourishing is not a mechanical process, it's an organic process. And you cannot predict the outcome of human development. All you can do is, like a farmer, is create the conditions under which they will begin to flourish. So when we look at reforming education and transforming it, it isn't like cloning a system. There are great ones, like KIPS. It's a great system. There are many great models. It's about customizing them to your circumstances and personalizing education to the people you're actually teaching. And doing that, I think, is the answer to the future, because it's not about scaling a new solution. It's about creating a movement in education in which people develop their own solutions, but with external support based on a personalized curriculum. Now, in this room, there are people who represent extraordinary resources in business, in multimedia, in the internet. These technologies, combined with extraordinary talents of teachers, provide an opportunity to revolutionize education. And I urge you to get involved in it, because it's vital not just to ourselves, but to the future of our children. But we have to change from the industrial model to an agricultural model where each school can be flourishing tomorrow. That's where children experience life, or at home if that's where they choose to be educated with their families or their friends. There's been a lot of talk about dreams over the course of this few days. And I wanted just to, very quickly, I was very struck by Natalie Merchant's songs last night, recovering old poems. I wanted to read you a quick, very short poem from W.B. Yeats, who some of you may know. He wrote this to his love, Maud Gonne, and he was bewailing the fact that he couldn't really give her what he thought she wanted from him. And he says, "I've got something else, but it may not be for you." He says this: "Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with gold and silver light, of blue and the dim and the dark cloths, of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. And every day, everywhere, our children spread their dreams beneath our feet. And we should tread softly." Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
They have names like Idle Time Books and Panther Coffee, with free enterprise puns like Hue and Cry and Smash Records. And one Saturday a year, small businesses remind a nation of the benefits of shopping small, like the way David Kaplan at Shell Lumber shows you how to use a chop saw, then invites you back when the warehouse becomes the community theater, or the way Camille Russler of Ever After travels the journey from despair to bliss with every bride-to-be.
Absolutely stunning.
On just one day, 100 million of us joined a movement. And Main Street found its might again. And Main Street found its fight again. And we, the locals, found delight again.
That's the power of all of us.
That's the power of all of us.
That's the power of all of us.
That's the membership effect of American Express.
Everyone is both a learner and a teacher. This is me being inspired by my first tutor, my mom. And this is me teaching Introduction to Artificial Intelligence to 200 students at Stanford University. Now, the students and I enjoyed the class, but it occurred to me that while the subject matter of the class is advanced and modern, the teaching technology isn't. In fact, I use basically the same technology as this 14th century classroom. Note the textbook, the sage on the stage, and the sleeping guy in the back. Just like today. So my co-teacher, Sebastian Thrun, and I thought there must be a better way. We challenged ourselves to create an online class that would be equal or better in quality to our Stanford class, but to bring it to anyone in the world for free. We announced the class on July 29th, and within 2 weeks, 50,000 people had signed up for it. And that grew to 160,000 students from 209 countries. We were thrilled to have that kind of audience and just a bit terrified that we hadn't finished preparing the class yet. So we got to work. We studied what others had done, what we could copy, and what we could change. Benjamin Bloom had showed that one-on-one tutoring works best. So that's what we tried to emulate, like with me and my mom, even though we knew it would be one on thousands. Here, an overhead video camera is recording me as I'm talking and drawing on a piece of paper. A student said, "This class felt like sitting in a bar with a really smart friend who's explaining something you haven't grasped but are about to." And that's exactly what we were aiming for. Now, from Khan Academy, we saw that short 10-minute videos work much better than trying to record an hour-long lecture and put it on the small format screen. We decided to go even shorter and more interactive. Our typical video is 2 minutes, sometimes shorter, never more than 6, and then we pause for a quiz question to make it feel like one-on-one tutoring. Here, I'm explaining how a computer uses a grammar of English to parse sentences, and here, there's a pause, and the student has to reflect, understand what's going on, and check the right boxes before they can continue. Students learn best when they're actively practicing. We wanted to engage them, to have them grapple with ambiguity, and guide them to synthesize the key ideas themselves. We mostly avoid questions like, here's a formula, now tell me the value of y when x is equal to 2. We preferred open-ended questions. One student wrote, "Now I'm seeing Bayes networks and examples of game theory everywhere I look." And I like that kind of response. That's just what we were going for. We didn't want students to memorize the formulas. We wanted to change the way they looked at the world. And we succeeded, or I should say, the students succeeded. And it's a little bit ironic that we set about to disrupt traditional education, and in doing so, we ended up making our online class much more like a traditional college class than other online classes. Most online classes, the videos are always available. You can watch them anytime you want. But if you can do it anytime, it means you can do it tomorrow. And if you can do it tomorrow, well, you may not ever get around to it. So we brought back the innovation of having due dates. You could watch the videos anytime you wanted during the week, but at the end of the week, you had to get the homework done. This motivated the students to keep going, and it also meant that everybody was working on the same thing at the same time. So if you went into a discussion forum, you could get an answer from a peer within minutes. Now I'll show you some of the forums, most of which were self-organized by the students themselves. From Daphne Kohler and Andrew Ng, we learned the concept of flipping the classroom. Students watch the videos on their own, and then they come together to discuss them. From Eric Mazur, I learned about peer instruction, that peers can be the best teachers because they're the ones that remember what it's like to not understand. Sebastian and I have forgotten some of that. Of course, we couldn't have a classroom discussion with tens of thousands of students, so we encouraged and nurtured these online forums. And finally, from Teach from America, I learned that a class is not primarily about information. More important is motivation and determination. It was crucial that the students see that we're working hard for them and they're all supporting each other. Now, the class ran 10 weeks, and in the end, about half of the 160,000 students watched at least one video each week, and over 20,000 finished all the homework, putting in 50 to 100 hours. They got this statement of accomplishment. So what did we learn? Well, we tried some old ideas and some new and put them together, but there are more ideas to try. Sebastian's teaching another class now. I'll do one in the fall. Stanford, Coursera, Udacity, MITx, and others have more classes coming. It's a really exciting time. But to me, the most exciting part of it is the data that we're gathering. We're gathering thousands of interactions per student per class, billions of interactions altogether. And now we can start analyzing that. And when we learn from that, do experimentations, that's when the real revolution will come. And you'll be able to see the results from a new generation of amazing students.
I'm Rich Baranick, and what I'd like to talk a little bit about today are some ideas that I think have just tremendous resonance with all the things that have been talked about the last 2 days. In fact, so many different points of resonance, it's going to be difficult to bring them all up, but I'll try to do my best. Does anybody remember these? Okay, so these are LP records, and they've been replaced, right? They've been swept away over the last 2 decades by these types of world-flattening digitization technologies, right? And I think it was best witnessed when Thomas was playing the music as we came in the room today. What's happened in the music world is there's a culture or an ecosystem that's been created that if you take some words from Apple, the catchphrase would be create, rip, mix, and burn. What I mean by that is anyone in the world is free and allowed to create new music and musical ideas. Anyone in the world is allowed to rip or copy musical ideas, use them in innovative ways. Anyone is allowed to mix them in different types of ways, draw connections between musical ideas, and people can burn them or create final products and continue the circle. And what that's done is it's created, like I said, a vibrant community that's very inclusive with people continually working to connect musical ideas, innovate them, and keep things constantly up to date, right? Today's hit single is not last year's hit single, okay? But I'm not here to talk about music today. I'm here to talk about books, okay? In particular, textbooks and the kind of educational materials that we use every day in school. Has anyone here ever been to school? Okay? Does anybody realize there's a crisis in our schools around the world, okay? I hope, okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but what I want to talk about is some of the disconnects that appear when an author publishes a book that, in fact, the publishing process, just because of the fact that it's complicated, it's heavy, books are expensive, creates a sort of a wall between authors of books and the ultimate users of books, be they teachers, students, or just general readers, okay? And this is even more true if you happen to speak a language other than one of the world's major languages, and especially English. And I'm going to call these people below the barrier shutouts, because they're really shut out of the process of being able to share their knowledge with the world. And so what I want to talk about today is trying to take these ideas, right, that we've seen in the musical culture and try to bring these towards reinventing the way we think about writing books, using them, and teaching from them. Okay? So that's what I'd like to talk about, and really how do we get from where we are now to where we need to go. So the first thing I'd like you to do is a little thought experiment. So imagine taking all the world's books, okay, everybody imagine books, and imagine just tearing out the pages. So liberating these pages, and imagine digitizing them, right? And then storing them in a vast, interconnected global repository. Think of it as a massive iTunes, right, for book-type content, okay? And then take that material and imagine making it all open so that people can modify it, play with it, improve it. Imagine making it free so that anyone in the world can have access to all of this knowledge. And imagine using information technology so that you can update this content, improve it, play with it on a time scale that's more on the order of seconds instead of years, okay? Instead of the editions coming out every 2 years of a book, imagine it coming out every 25 seconds, okay? So imagine we could do that, and imagine we could put people into this, right? So that we can truly build an ecosystem with not just authors, but all the people who could be or want to be authors in all the different languages of the world. And I think if you could do this, it would be called, well, I'm just going to refer to it as a knowledge ecosystem. Okay, so really, this is the dream. And in a sense, what you can think of it is we're trying to enable anyone in the world, I mean anyone in the world, to be their own educational DJ, creating educational materials, sharing them with the world, constantly innovating on them. Okay, so this is the dream. In fact, this dream is actually being realized, right? Over the last 6.5 years, we've been working really hard at Rice University in a project called Connections. And so what I'd like to do for the rest of the talk is just tell you a little bit about what people are doing with Connections, which you can kind of think of as the counterpoint to Nicholas Negroponte's talk yesterday, where they're working on the hardware of bringing education to the world. We're working on the open source tools and the content. Okay, so that's sort of to put it in perspective here. Okay, so create. So what are some of the people that are using these kind of tools? Well, the first thing is there's a community of engineering professors from Cambridge to Kyoto who are developing engineering content in electrical engineering to develop what you could think of as a massive super textbook right, that covers the entire area of electrical engineering, and not only that, can be customized for use in each of their own individual institutions, okay? It's people like Kitty Jones, right, a shutout, okay? Private music teacher and mom from Champaign, Illinois, who wanted to share her fantastic music content with the world on how to teach kids how to play music. Her material is now used over 600,000 times per month. Okay? Tremendous, tremendous use. In fact, a lot of this use coming from United States K through 12 schools, because anyone who's involved in as schools scale back, the first thing that's cut is the music curriculum. And so this is just indicating the tremendous thirst for this kind of open, free content. A lot of teachers are using this stuff. Okay, what about ripping? What about copying, reusing, right? A team of volunteers at the University of Texas El Paso, graduate students, translating this engineering super textbook ideas, and within about a week, having this be some of our most popular material in widespread use all over Latin America, and in particular in Mexico. Okay, because of the open, extensible nature of this. People, volunteers, and even companies that are translating materials into Asian languages like Chinese, Japanese, and Thai to spread the knowledge even further. Okay, what about people who are mixing? What does mixing mean? Mixing means building customized courses, means building customized books. Okay, companies like National Instruments who are embedding very powerful interactive simulations into the material so that we can go way beyond a regular kind of textbook to an experience that all the teaching materials are things you can actually interact with and play around with and actually learn as you do. Okay? We've been working with Teachers Without Borders, who are very interested in mixing our materials. They're going to be using Connections as their platform to develop and deliver teaching materials for teaching teachers how to teach in 84 countries around the world. TWB is currently in Iraq training 20,000 teachers supported by USAID. And to them, this idea of being able to remix and customize to the local context is extraordinarily important, because just providing free content to people has actually been likened by people in the developing world to a kind of cultural imperialism. That if you don't empower people with the ability to recontextualize the material, translate it into their own language, and take ownership of it, it's not good. Okay. Other organizations we've been working with, UC Merced. People know about UC Merced. It's a new university in California in the Central Valley, working very closely with community colleges. They're actually developing a lot of their science and engineering curriculum to spread widely around the world in our system, and they're also trying to develop all of their software tools completely open source. We've been working with AMD, which has a project called 50 by 15, which is trying to bring internet connectivity to 50% of the world's population by 2015. We're going to be providing content to them in a whole range of different languages. And we've also been working with a number of other organizations, in particular, a bunch of the projects that are funded by Hewlett Foundation, who have taken a real leadership role in this area of open content. Okay, burn. I think this is sort of quite interesting. Burn is the idea of trying to create the physical instantiation of one of these courses. And I think a lot of you received, I think all of you received one of these music books in your gift pack. Well, present for you. Just tell you quickly about it. This is an engineering textbook. It's about 300 pages long. Okay, hardbound. This costs, anybody guess? How much would it cost in a bookstore? Okay, this costs $22 to the student. Okay? Why does it cost $22? Because it's published on demand and it's developed from this repository of open materials. Okay? If this book were to be published by a regular publisher, it would cost at least $122. Okay? So what we're seeing is moving this burning or publication process from the regular sort of single author authored book towards community authored materials that are modular, that are customized to each individual class and published on demand very inexpensively, either pushed out through Amazon, right, or published directly through a on-demand press like Coop. Okay? And I think that this is an extraordinarily interesting area because there is tremendous area under this long tail in publishing. Okay, we're not talking about the Harry Potter end right at the left side. We're talking about books on hypergeometric partial differential equations, right? Books that might sell 100 copies a year, 1,000 copies a year. There's tremendous sustaining revenue, right, under this long tail to sustain open projects like ours, but also to sustain this new emergence of on-demand publishers, okay, like Coop, who produced these two books. And I think one of the things that you should take away from this talk is that there's an impending cut out the middleman, right, disintermediation that's going to be happening in the publishing industry, and it's going to reach a crescendo over the next few years. And I think that it's for our benefit, really, and for the world's benefit. Okay. So what are the enablers? What's really making all of this happen? There's tons of technology, okay? And the only piece of technology that I really want to talk about is XML. How many people know about XML? Oh, great. So it's the future of the web, right? It's semantic representation of content. And what you can really think of XML in this case is it's the packaging that we're putting around these pages. Remember we took the book, tore the pages out? Well, what the XML is going to do is it's going to basically it's going to turn those pages into Lego blocks, right? XML are the nubs on the Lego that allow us to combine the content together in myriad different ways. And it provides us a framework to share content. So it lets you take this ecosystem, right, in its primordial state, right, of all this content, all the pages you've torn out of books, and create highly sophisticated learning machines, right? Books, courses, course packs, okay? It gives you the ability to personalize the learning experience to each individual student, right? So that every student can have a book or a course that's customized to their learning style, their context, their language, and the things that excite them. It lets you reuse the same materials in multiple different ways, okay, and surprising new ways. It lets you interconnect ideas, indicating how fields, right, relate to each other, okay? And I'll just give you my personal story. We came up with this 6.5 years ago because I teach the stuff in the red box, okay? In my day job, as Chris said, I'm an electrical engineering professor. I teach signal processing. And my challenge was to show that this math, wow, about half you already fallen asleep just looking at the equation, that this seemingly dry math is actually the center of this tremendously powerful web, right, that links technology, that links really cool applications like music synthesizers to tremendous economic opportunities, but also governed by intellectual property. And the thing that I realized is there was no way that I, right, as an engineer, could write this book that would get all of this across. We needed a community to do it, and we needed new tools to be able to interconnect these ideas. And I think that really, in a sense, what we're trying to do is make Minsky's dream come to a reality where you can imagine all the books in a library actually starting to talk to each other, right? And people who are teachers out here, whoever taught, you know that it's the interconnections between ideas that teaching is really all about. Okay, back to math, right? Imagine, right, this is possible, that every single equation that you click on in one of your new e-texts is something that you're going to be able to explore and experiment with. Right, so imagine your kid's algebra textbook, right, in 7th grade. You can click on every single equation and bring up a little tool to be able to experiment with it, tinker with it, understand it, because we really don't understand until we do, okay? The same type of markup like MathML for chemistry. Imagine chemistry textbooks that actually understand the structure of how molecules are formed. Imagine music XML that actually lets you delve into the semantic structure of music, play with it, understand it. It's no wonder that everybody's getting into it, right? Even the 3 wise men. Okay. The second big enabler, and this is where I told a big lie. The second big enabler is intellectual property. Because in fact, I got up here and I talked about how great the music culture is. We can share and rip, mix, and burn. But in fact, that's all illegal, right? And we would be accused as pirates for doing that, right? Because this music has been propertized. It's now owned, right? Much of it by big industries, okay? So really the key thing here is we can't let this happen. We can't let this Napster, right, thing happen here. So what we have to do is get it right from the very beginning. And what we have to do is find a intellectual property framework that makes sharing safe. okay, and makes it easily understandable. And the inspiration here is taken from open source software, things like Linux and the GPL. Okay, and the idea is the Creative Commons licenses. How many people have heard of Creative Commons? If you have not, you must learn about it. CreativeCommons.org. At the bottom of every piece of material in Connections and in lots of other projects, you can find their logo. Clicking on that logo takes you to an absolute no-nonsense, human-readable, right, document, a deed, that tells you exactly what you can do with this content. In fact, you're free, right, to share it, to do all of these things, to copy it, to change it, even to make commercial use of it, as long as you attribute the author. Okay? Because in academic publishing and much of educational publishing, it's really this idea of sharing knowledge. That's why, and making impact. That's why people write, not necessarily making bucks, okay? We're not talking about Harry Potter, right? We're at the long tail end here, okay? Behind that is the legal code, right? So if you want to very carefully constructed, and Creative Commons is taking off, right? Over 43 million things out there licensed with a Creative Commons license, not just text, but music, images, video, and there's actually a tremendous uptake of the number of people that are actually licensing music to make it free for people to do this whole idea of resampling, mixing, burning, and sharing. Okay, so I'd like to conclude with just last few points. So we've built this idea of a commons. People are using it. We get over 500,000 unique visitors per month just to our particular site. MIT OpenCourseWare, which is another large open content site, gets a similar number of hits. But how do we protect this? How do we protect it into the future? And the first thing that people were probably thinking is quality control, right? Because we're saying that anybody can contribute things to this commons. Okay? Anybody can contribute anything. Okay, so that could be a problem, okay? So it didn't take long, right, till people started contributing materials, for example, on lingerie, which is actually a pretty good module. The only problem is it's plagiarized, right, from a major French feminist journal. And when you go to the supposed course website, it points to a lingerie selling website. Okay, so this is a little bit of a problem. So we clearly need some kind of idea of quality control, and this is really where the idea of review and peer review comes in. Okay, you come to TED. Why do you come to TED? Because Chris and his team have ensured that things are very, very high quality, right? And so we need to be able to do the same thing, right? And we need to be able to design structures, and what we're doing is designing social software to enable anyone to build their own peer review process. And we call these things lenses. And basically what they allow is anyone out there to develop their own peer review process so that they can focus on the content in the repository that they think is really important. And you could think of TED as a potential lens. Okay, so I'd just like to end by saying you can really view this as a call to action, right? Connections and the open content is all about sharing knowledge. All of you here are tremendously imbued with tremendous amounts of knowledge, and what I'd like to do is invite each and every one of you to contribute to this project and other projects of its type, because I think together we can truly change the landscape of education and educational publishing. So thanks very much.